Welcome to the Storyteller Magic Channel. Today we have 3 stories full of new words. Do not miss the surprise at the end.
Birthday girl. Birthday girl Carly liked to tell people about her birthday. "It's my birthday on Friday," she said. "Is it?" said Mr. Ditano. He put some bananas in his shop window and smiled. "It's my birthday on Friday," said Carly. "That's exciting," said Mrs. Hill in the cake shop. "It's my birthday on Friday," said Carly. "How exciting," said Mr. James. He looked up at the sky. "But I have to go and fly my aeroplane now." "It's my birthday on Friday," said Carly. "Birthdays are exciting," said Tom McDonald. He was painting the fence by the park. When Friday came, there was no birthday message from Mr. Ditano or Mrs. Hill or Mr. James or Tom McDonald. "Did they forget?" she said to Mum. But Carly got a surprise when they went past Mr. Ditano's shop. "Oh, look," she said. "He didn't forget." There was a message in the window. It said, "Happy birthday, Carly, in bananas." There was another surprise at Mrs. Hill's cake shop. "Look at that cake in the window," laughed Carly. "It says Happy Birthday, Carly, on it." "I know," said Mum. She smiled. "It's for your birthday tea." Carly got her next surprise when she saw the fen by the park. Tom was painting Happy Birthday, Carly. He waved. "Have a good birthday," he called to Carly. But the big surprise came when Carly got to school. She and the children looked up and saw Mr. James's little aeroplane and a message in the sky. "Happy birthday, Carly," it said. "Now all the people in the town know it's my birthday," laughed Carly.
What day of the week was Carly's birthday?
David's party. David was playing in the garden and Dad was trying to cut the grass. Then he called David. "David, will you go and telephone Mr. Small and ask him if I can borrow his garden shears, please?" said Dad. "All right," said David. And off he went into the house. Now, who did Dad want me to telephone? He thought. Oh, yes, it was Mr. Tall. So he telephoned Mr. Tall and asked him if Dad could borrow his garden chairs. "Why does your dad want to borrow my garden chairs?" asked Mr. Tall. "I don't know," said David. "Perhaps we're going to have a party." "All right," said Mr. Tall. "I'll bring the chairs round, but go and telephone Mrs. Green and ask her if you can borrow her table." So David went to look for the telephone number. Now, who did Mr. Tall want me to telephone? He thought. Oh, yes, it was Mrs. Brown. So he telephoned Mrs. Brown and asked her if Dad could borrow her stable. "Why does your dad want to borrow my stable?" asked Mrs. Brown. "I don't know," said David. "We're having a party. Perhaps our garden is too small for a party." "All right," said Mrs. Brown. "I'll get the stable ready, but go and telephone Mr. James and ask him for some big tablecloths." So David went to look for the telephone number. Now, who did Mrs. Brown want me to telephone? He thought. Oh, yes, it was Mr. Jones. So he telephoned Mr. Jones and asked him if Dad could borrow some big plates and mops. "Why does your dad want to borrow some big plates and mops?" asked Mr. Jones. "I don't know," said David. "We're going to have a party in Mrs. Brown's stable. Perhaps the plates are to put food on and the mops are to mop the stable." "All right," said Mr. Jones. "I'll bring them round, but go and telephone Mr. Baker and ask him to bring some bin bags." "All right," said David, and he went to look for the telephone number. Now, who did Mr. Jones want me to telephone? He thought. Oh, yes, it was the baker. So he telephoned the baker and asked him to bring some big buns. "We're going to have a party in Mrs. Brown's stable, and Mr. Jones is going to bring some mops and plates," he said. "Perhaps the buns are to go on the plates." "All right," said the baker. "I'll bring the buns round. Now go and get ready for the party." So David went to get ready. When he came down, Dad was waiting for him. "What have you been doing, David?" he asked. "Mr. Tall has brought me some chairs. Mrs. Brown has telephoned to say that her stable is ready. Mr. Jones has brought some mops and plates, and the baker has brought lots of buns. All I wanted to do was cut my grass." So David told Dad all about his telephone calls. "Oh dear," said Dad. "I wanted to borrow some shears, not some chairs. What are we going to do with all these things?" "I know," said David. "Let's have a party after all."
What did David's father plan to do in the story?
The video game. Susie had a video game. She pressed the start button. A little man came onto the screen. He waved. Susie pressed the A button, and the little man jumped. She pressed the B button, and he ran. Susie pressed all the buttons. She pressed them again and again, and the little man ran and jumped. He went up a mountain and went swinging through the trees. Then, suddenly, he fell down into a cave where there were lots of monsters. "Help!" said a voice. Susie looked round. There was nobody there. "Help me, Susie," said the voice again. Susie looked back at the screen. The voice was coming from the little man. "Get me out of here!" he cried. "Please get me out of here!" Susie pressed the buttons, but the monsters were still there. She pressed them again, but she couldn't make them go away. Suddenly she stopped. "How can you talk?" she said to the little man. "You are just a video game." "Help!" he cried. "Please help or the monsters will eat me up." "If they eat you up, you can always have another life in a video game," said Susie. "No," said the little man. "I have got one life just like you. Help! Help!" Susie pressed the buttons again, but the monsters were still there. They looked very hungry. "Oh dear, I don't know how to help you," said Susie. "I have pressed all the buttons, but they don't work." She stopped and thought, "Perhaps if I switch the game off, the monsters will go away." Susie pressed the off button, but the monsters were still there. "Help!" cried the little man again. Susie turned the video game machine over and took out the batteries. When she looked at the screen again, the monsters were still there. "Quick!" cried the little man. "How can I help you?" "Tell me how to help you," cried Susie. "Just give me your hand," said the little man. Susie put out her hand and touched the screen. Suddenly, there was the little man in her hand. He was very small. "Oh, thank you, Susie," he said. "You have saved my life." Susie smiled. Just then, there was a big bang from the video game machine. Susie looked at the screen. It had gone gray. "Look," she said to the little man. "The monsters have gone." But when she looked down, her hand was empty.
What did Susie do to save the little man? Surprise! Check the description for a link to 2 coloring pages. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications.